Hello, my name is Dennis Noson here in Seattle, and I am giving a talk titled Extravagant Naming, a Map of Concord Places and Thoreau's Calendar Project. Thoreau is well known for investing a lifetime acquiring a deep and intimate knowledge of the natural world surrounding his hometown, the village of Concord in Massachusetts in northeastern US. And going about his business, Thoreau named an astonishing 3,203 places, to be exact. In an earlier presentation at the Name Society Portland conference 9 years ago, I revealed some characteristics of Thoreau's naming of places. Since then, I've worked up a full data set, and these have been extracted from his 4,000-page journal, an astounding 4,000 pages, which is one of the great literary works of the 19th century by an American author. This journal was created during a 25-year period of time, and I used it to create a gazetteer, a list of names that would go on a map of the town of Concord. It's probably the largest set of place names employed by any American author. Thoreau is probably well known to most of you as the 19th century American author of Walden, the handbook of back to the land movement of the 60s, the environmental movement of the 70s, which is still going, and the patron saint for naturalists who write well. What you may not know about him is his love of maps and related profession, his day job as a respected surveyor for the town and for neighboring landowners. You may also know of his devotion to causes of the day, anti-slavery and anti-war. It was the Mexican War in the 1850s. I should be sure to mention that he was also a travel writer, walks on Cape Cod, excursion to Quebec, an essay titled Yankee in Canada, and moose hunting canoe trips in the Maine woods, which ended up as pieces for newspapers and magazines, and later published after his death is a edited complete essay. He was also a woodland ecologist who gave lectures to farmers about the better way to practice land management. In all these things, Thoreau was intimately connected, as I said, to the landscape of his home. He sounded bottoms of rivers, named their bends and deep holes. And from 1855 to 1861, he drew up dozens of charts on large sheets of paper, spreadsheets we call them nowadays, to display all of his seasonal journal observations in grids of months for a given year, for birds, or by flower bloom times for a given month, with each sheet for a particular year. And all of this was part of his calendar project. And why did he do this? There is no lecture, essay, or book that came out of this calendar project, nor his extravagant naming, which I would consider to be a project of his as well. But I believe it is the calendar project of these large spreadsheets of phenomena in Concord by month or by year, that are intimately connected to naming of places. And I'll get back to this at the end of my talk. But what he did not do is create a map of these places that were part of his sense of place. In a way, he did not need the map because his place names, I believe, were a mnemonic for a practical inventory of the local places. In other words, he knew them all by name, he knew where they were, and he could call them up as a way of reminding himself what he was going to be doing next. There have been maps made, but they name no more than 380 of the 3,000 places I've identified. And he may have been working on a project toward constructing a mythical landscape of the seasonal changes of the area around Concord. So let's first have a quick look at these place names and his style of naming them, pardon me. And he used often common names as for land use, farm, field, meadows, woods or woodlots, and his place name would be Great Meadows or Walden Woods or the Great Field. Great Meadows, Great Field, those were the original names of the colonists when they established the town of Concord in the mid-1600s. He used this place name of type, as you can see in this chart, for field. His land use place names, 24% of them used field as part of the name, which in all of his place names represents only 7% during the years 1851 to 1855. So we have that example data extracted from place names that are tabulated in a database I created of 29,600 some lines. And from that, I've attempted to put together a picture of how the relationship between this place naming and the other projects he was working on. Down at the bottom of the chart, I believe he was mapping time with how he visited places and used their names in his journal. He was also mapping culture, and he may have been mapping his own mind, the mapping Thoreau. The landscape of Concord that he traveled in looks something like this. This is Walden Pond viewed from a hill to the southeast. In the distance, you can see on the horizon another hill he named often, Wachusett. Here's a map of the central part of the town showing a number of places he visited in August 1852 that he named in his journal. This landscape of Concord is really a naturalist landscape with hills 700 feet high, ponds, wetlands, and rivers. This core area called Walden Woods was where he visited most often. The green arrow down there shows the viewpoint from Hilltop south of Fairhaven Hill. And here's what the view looks like. It's from Baker Farm. And I want to move on now to think about how this naming is a literary project of Thoreau's. While browsing back through his journal just this week, I found a phrase that caught my attention. The shore, quote, the shore might be named for him. He was referring to a farmer named Garfield. And so I've added to the Gazetteer just this week the place name Garfields Shore. Here's the appearance of the Gazetteer. It's one of about 40 pages, the double column full length that look like this, totaling up over 3,200 places. And we could call this Thoreau's literary Gazetteer. It's a literary naming, and literary lists are a common expression of some poets and some authors. In Thoreau's example from his journal, he names several places as he walks through the landscape, surveying and looking for plants. His sister Sophia was there at where he saw Wachusett Mountain, and he continues. Goodwin, the one-eyed fisherman, is back again at his old business. He says he's been to Cape Cod a-haying. He says there's salt grass cuts about the same with our fresh meadow. He meant meadow grass. And last line of this extract from his journal, saw a chewink. So in these 12 lines, he's named 6 plant species, 1 bird, 1 sister, and 4 places. Walt Whitman engaged in poetically in naming places, and in these 5 lines from Leaves of Grass, he's named 4 peaks and 12 ranges. But all these, in this case, Thoreau's scope of geography is much more intimate and local compared with Whitman imagining far places. And Whitman's name in that poetic extract are all in the same category of mountainous features, whereas Thoreau tends to mix up what he is setting in the scene, in effect to recreate a sense of that local place. An example of this would be the Ponds chapter in Walden. If we were to look at a map of the central part of Concord, this is the first map published 1906, shows 308 places. And of course, there's some errors, which I've indicated with a blue arrow. There's a cut through a hill that this map maker, who knew Thoreau's journal very well, located right by Walden Pond, but it's actually a railroad cut about a half mile north. Here's a close-up of that. The place is called Deep Cut, and shown here on this rather handsome map published by the Sierra Club. Bryant was the map maker for the Thoreau country, and this map has 105 places, far fewer than the 380 places on the earlier map of 1906. Here's a 1990 map that goes with all of the scholarly publications of Thoreau's journal, and it only locates 76 places, has a few errors, and even has a name that's not in Thoreau's journal at all. It's a modern feature. And Deep Cut seems to be on every map, that railroad cut by Walden Pond, half a mile north, but not on this map. Here's an example of another map showing where Deep Cut actually is. That bold arrow points at it. And this publication on Walden Pond, A History, has many maps, but there's no gazetteer to go with it. Here's a bird's eye view map that was published 15 years ago. It shows Deep Cut at the end of that arrow, but it's not named there. You can see the railroad that came by Walden Pond right when Thoreau was living there, before he wrote Walden. And the artist has depicted that and many other features, including Thoreau's home, which is about in the middle of this pictorial. Thoreau's use of place names began a shift in the early 1800s. The first 5 years of his journal that became much more detailed than his earlier literary style of journal writing. And by 1855, the field word occurs much less often, half as often as it did earlier, as it becomes more oriented toward botany and to creating his calendar project. So his walking itinerary is what I've worked with over the past years. that has information about where he went in sequence rather than just the names he used. Here's an example of one of the places he visited, Goose Pond, just north of Walden. Here's a page from the Princeton Journal, the scholarly publication that is only halfway through publishing in a well-annotated edition representing exactly the way Thoreau's manuscript journal was written, and does not make editorial changes or fix punctuation. And here he's picked out a name of a hill in the Shawtuct. He's named a brook. And then Conantum is a region as well as a hill. And then he names Hubbard's Meadow. So he's got a farmer in there in that place name. And then there's Ivy Pass, which is difficult to locate even after 29,000 lines of following roughly 500 walking trips, or 5,000 walking trips. Here's what the database looks like on a full page. Here's a close-up of it with the examples of the notation. So I'm showing in sequence, he went from Marlborough Road at the top there, item number 7, to 2nd Division Brook, item number 8. Here's the river that at flood time looks more like a pond, the Concord River that runs by the town. Here's the page of one of his many spreadsheets that Thoreau developed, and he's relating phenomena that might be happening on the left column to years. So if he's picked, for example, the singing of a lark, that would go year by year across the row, and then within the row he would write what month and where he extracted that from his journal. I think these place names that worked as a mnemonic for him are also take on a new dimension in this calendar spreadsheet project. And I would like to think that, for example, when he visited Strawberry Hill, which was part of a repeated walking itinerary to check on the blooming of the sweetgale and its seed time, he was beginning to develop a matrix of meaning for his place naming that is expressed in the calendar project. Had he drawn a map at the end of his life, he would have anticipated Robert Louis Stevenson, whose publisher lost Stevenson's hand-drawn map of Treasure Island. Stevenson reconstructed it by reading his own novel. Using a similar imaginative procedure, applying a spatial context of adjacent mapped locations extracted from walking or his boating on the river, and recording it all in his journal, it's possible, I think, to reconstruct the process of Thoreau's reconstruct the process to recover Thoreau's lost map of Concord. It's only by right now, it's only a start for discovering the matrix of these dynamic links between his calendar project and the 3,000 place names which populate the landscape he loved. So thank you. And
we were glad to have Dennis's presentation and notice the linkages between obviously what he is doing with us for the American Name Society, tracing the names on the map and the names in the journals with his work in the Thoreau Society. Sorry we aren't able to have him with us for any questions,